Now at this point of time, there are a number of task runners or build tools as you might think of them. And Grunt is probably one of the most used and most famous of them. But the problem is that it has begun to seem a little verbose and overwhelming. Luckily, there's a new contender called Gulp, which simplifies this process drastically. Now let me show you how easy it is to use on your machine. Now the first step is to install Gulp globally. To do that, make sure that you have Node.js installed, but if you don't worry, it's just a one-click install. So now we have Gulp available globally. Now let's save it to our project dependencies. Let's just quickly create a package.json file. And for now, let's just make it an empty object. Okay, now let's save Gulp in our project dependencies. To do that, again, we use our nodes package manager. So now we have saved our project dependency. Now if I cat the package.json file, you can see the dev dependencies is Gulp 3.8.0. So that looks good. Now PHP users can think of the package.json file as equivalent to their composer.json file. Now how Gulp works is that it is a set of plugins, and one plugin does one and only one job. So we can pipe the output through different kinds of plugins that do different jobs. We can pipe the output through that to get good result. Now, first of all, to run the tasks, we need a gulp file.js. So let's create that gulp file. Before creating the gulp file, we need to decide what functions we wanted to perform. Now I wanted to minify a CSS document. Now to do that, we'll need a plugin called Gulp Minify Css. So let's pull that in quickly. And don't worry, you don't need to memorize all these plugins name. You can just search in the Gulp.js website and you'll get a list of all the plugins. So we have done that. Now let's go ahead and create our gulp file. First of all, we need to pull in our gulp dependency. To do that, let's create a variable called gulp, and inside that we'll say that we require the gulp or library to run this gulp file, and without this your gulp file will not run. Okay, so we have pulled it in. Now I want to minify a CSS file, so I'll pull in the Minify CSS plugin. I'll assign it a variable of Minify CSS, and I'll say again it requires the Gulp Minify CSS plugin. Okay, with this done, we have pulled successfully in the plugins and libraries that we require. Now we should create a new task. So I'll create it by saying gulp.task. It's creating a new task, and I'll name it CSS. You can name it anything you want. What functions it will perform we'll define here now. First of all, we need to set a source directory. So we'll say return gulp.source. Okay, this is a source directory, and which will be the directory that will contain our CSS files. So I'll just say I'll create a main or maybe a CSS directory, and I'll create a main.css file inside that directory, and I'll just set it as the source. Now as I said, we can pipe this through various plugins. So first of all, I'll pipe this through the Minify CSS plugin, obviously. So it'll minify the CSS file. Okay, after this we want to set a destination, so I'll again pipe it through the destination plugin. Again, this is not a separate plugin, this is provided by Gulp, and we'll set it to a CSS min directory, and that is done. Now we can run Gulp and see what the output looks like. Okay, I'll just run Gulp here, but yeah, we don't have that CSS directory and the main.css file. So let's again enter our Gulp file. So I'll create the CSS directory, and inside this I'll create the main.css. So let's quickly define something. Body, yeah, maybe it has a margin of 0, maybe it also has a padding of 20 pixels, maybe. Yeah, so that done, let's just save it. Now let's quit out of vim, and let's run our gulp file. It gives us an error. Again, that's a syntax error. Now if we run gulp, it'll again give us an error. As you haven't called a task, I'll look for a default task. And since you have no default task set up, I don't know what to do. Let's call the CSS task. And now you see the CSS task has been run and finished in 28 milliseconds. Now let's just open up main.css and you'll see that it has been minified, and yeah, that's quite a good start. Now next, what we want to do, we want to prefix our CSS selectors. So for that, again, I will open up in a new tab the gulp file, and again we'll install first our plugin. So we'll say the gulp auto prefixer plugin. Now that we have it installed, let's again shift in our gulp file and let's pull in this newly installed plugin, auto prefixer, and inside this we'll pull in a requirement. So we want something that will watch our directories for changes, and if any change is made to those directories, it will automatically run the default task and pipe out the output. So to do that, let's first create a default task, and inside this we'll create a watch function using the gulp watch plugin, and then we can watch the directories for changes. So first let's create a default task. So we'll say gulp.task again, and this time it will be named default. So first of all, it'll run the CSS task. So there's a function called gulp.run. Again, it will watch our CSS directory for changes. So we'll watch that directory for changes. So gulp provides a plugin, gulp.watch, and it will watch the CSS directory for changes. And what files it will watch? It will watch any kind of file that has an extension of CSS. Now with that done, we might go ahead and add our auto prefixer to the file. So before minifying, it will prefix our output. So before the minify, I'll pipe it through the auto prefixer. Prefixing has certain options involved. We can extend prefixing till the last 15, 20 or 30 versions. We can even do it till last one version. Now we can also add certain clauses like prefix this file, but only for browsers which have at least 5% of market usage. So we can do those things also, but for now we'll just prefix this for the last one version. So with that done, we can test this out. Let's just open our main.css file and let's just add some properties that will need prefixing. A border, and maybe we'll add a background, linear gradient. Let's just test it out. We'll save this and run gulp again. So now you see there's an error. So there's an error in line 18. So let's open up the gulp file and let's see what's the error in line 18. And here too, I need to end this. Now there is no error. It should run perfectly fine. Yeah. Now it has run our CSS task. It has run default task, and it has finished in 58 milliseconds. If I change some values in our main CSS file, like I change this from blue to red, and if I go ahead into this directory, you see that it has run the CSS task again. If we reload our file, you'll see that our properties are not prefixed. So why is that? Now if I head on to caniuse.com and show all the versions support for CSS gradients, you can see that the last version doesn't need a vendor prefix. So we'll go back a little bit more. We'll go back 15 versions. Let's quit this out and let's again run gulp. So it has again generated a new file for us. So if I go ahead into my main.css file and reload this, now you can see that it has easily created our WebKit gradient, our Moz gradient, and of course for other. So that looks good. Now next what we want to do is we want to give us some notifications that the task has been run. First, for that, let's quit out of the Grunt task and let's see. We have this plugin called Gulp Minify, so we'll install it. Let's just go into our Gulp file and let's edit this, bring in our dependency first. So we'll again create a variable called notify, and we'll say that we require the Gulp Minify plugin. So inside the main task, we want to pipe this through the Gulp Minify plugin. So we'll say Gulp Minify, and we can specify a message here. All is well, and done, buddy. And once we have done this, we'll just save this and run gulp once again. We haven't closed out. Gulp doesn't have this object, but it is provided by our notification. So if I run gulp again, you can see gulp gives us a notification. So with that, we conclude our lesson. It is quite simple to use gulp, and you can see within 20 lines of code we have done a lot. So for now, this is Upamanyu. If you like these videos, subscribe to my channel. Thank you.